He handed me a court notice that claimed I was unfit to handle my own money, signed with my doctor's forged name, and my son wouldn't meet my eyes. "Dad, this is for your own good," he said, and something in me cracked that will never set the same again. Before we dive into today's story, let us know where you're watching from. And as you watch, don't just sit back, be part of the experience. If a moment grabs your attention, whether it's powerful, unexpected, or deeply moving, drop a comment with the timestamp of that scene and share your thoughts. Your reactions bring the story to life, and we love seeing which moments resonate with you the most. And if you haven't already, hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. Now, grab a coffee or tea, settle in, and let's begin. The morning opened like a gray eyelid over Casco Bay, a pewter sky pressed low enough to touch the masts. I stood at my kitchen window with a chipped blue mug, the coffee black and a little bitter, listening to the faint hiss of the NOAA Marine Band. The radio voice droned about tide tables and a weak front drifting down from Penobscot. Small craft advisory possible after midnight. On the mantel, my father's model schooner caught the first flat light, rigging taut, sails forever furled. I reached up and pinched a loosened thread, habit before breakfast, a captain's reflex that never learned how to retire. My house is cedar-sided and stubborn, set back from the harbor just enough to muffle the gulls. After Gail died, I learned how to keep its rhythms alone. Coffee, ledger, walk, dock. The little leather wallet she stitched years ago still holds my card and a grocery list in her narrow hand. I don't dramatize that. Grief is too heavy to wave around. It's simply there, the way salt is in the air, present even when you don't talk about it. I finished the mug and opened the ledger book. Columns of neat pen lines anchored the week: electric, heat, groceries, church tithe, a tube of epoxy for a cracked oarlock. A J. Mita, my trustee, would approve. Last month, he sat at this table, showed me how to change passwords, add two-factor prune authorized users I didn't know I had, and set my phone to bark at every transaction above $30. Asset protection, he called it, like canvas covers for a storm. I called it seamanship on land and promised I'd stick with it. Out on the porch, the air tasted of rope and diesel. Buck Lawson waved from his driveway, one hand in a wool glove, the other cradling a coil of line he was re-whipping. "Strut on Murphy's pot hauler's still clunking," he said. "Told him it's the bearings." "Murphy listens about as well as a lobster," I said. Buck grinned. "That's why God invented evidence." "Good to have a witness," I said, and we both knew I meant more than boats. Buck's a straight man to have beside you when anything needs measuring from the level. Saturday means fish, so I walked the 2 blocks to the wharf with an old canvas tote and a list. Cod, little necks, parsley, and a lemon if they weren't wooden. The market already hummed, pallets thumped, ice hissed in shovels, somebody whistled "moon glow" off-key. The fishmonger slid a clean slab of cod onto paper and nudged a bag of clams across the wet counter. "You'll want these tight," he said. "Cold snap tonight." "Then chowder it is," I told him, and he smiled because he knows a winner answer when he hears one. Paying is a small ritual I've come to love. Tap, a cheerful chirp, a nod, and I'm back into the day. I set the tote down, pulled Gail's wallet from my jacket, and pressed the card to the terminal. The screen blinked, thought about it, and flashed a flat word I hadn't seen in years. Declined. I cleared my throat and tried again, as if the first pass had missed the antenna by an inch. Declined, it said, just as final, and the person behind me shifted, a polite shuffle that still stung. Heat climbed my neck. The fishmonger raised a hand. "No rush, Cap," he said. "Try a swipe." "I'll pay cash," I answered, and tucked the card away, as if it were nothing. A handful of crumpled bills did what plastic didn't. He wrapped the cod with the same care he always used. I thanked him and stepped aside with the bag. The embarrassment didn't leak away with the tide. It hung around my ears like fog. On the walk home, halyards pinged an impatient rhythm against aluminum masts. A tour boat idled, diesel coughing into the cold. I passed the dock where I taught Grant a bowline when he was 10, the knot locking clean under his small hands. "Like that?" he'd asked, bright-eyed. "Like that," I'd said, and the knot held. The memory arrived clean, without accusation. These days, his life swings out on a longer tether with Tessa, who can network a room faster than a halyard line through a pulley. They talk in the language of advances and brand, their plans always needing just a little more speed. I had not called it abuse, not then. I called it drift. You notice it first in a compass wobble, a degree here, a degree there, until the shoreline doesn't look like your chart. Back in my kitchen, I slid the cod onto a plate of ice and set the clams in a bowl under the tap. I turned the old laptop on, the fan whining like a lazy gull, and set it on the table near the porthole window. The ledger lay open, today's line blank. I wrote, "Card declined at Wharf. Verify settings and statements." If there was a simple explanation, a miskeyed password, a new authentication quirk, AJ would know where to look. If the explanation wasn't simple, well, storms don't announce themselves with trumpets. They whisper first. The radio popped again, barometer falling, wind veering east by evening. Watch the chop in the outer bay. I rubbed my thumb over the schooner's tiny deckhouse and found the loose line I'd noticed at dawn. The knot gave under a fingernail and I snugged it twice around the cleat. It took a breath to do it and less than that to feel better. Lines don't stay tight by accident. Neither do boundaries. By late afternoon, the light dulled to tin and then to graphite. The harbor flattened to a sheet of black glass, broken only by a gull skimming close enough to ruffle its reflection. I washed the cutting board, stacked it to dry, and listened to the house settle the way it does when the temperature drops. In the quiet, I heard again the small sound that hadn't come at the market, a silly thing to dwell on, a missing chirp, but the absence told like a foghorn in my head. I could feel pressure falling somewhere I couldn't name. I flicked the desk lamp on and opened the banking site, the password new feeling under my fingers like a knot tied yesterday. Two-factor pinged my phone. I approved it, watched the accounts populate, and let out a breath I hadn't meant to hold. Nothing dramatic leaped from the screen. Still, I drew a box in the margin of the ledger around the word verify and set my phone to wake me if any charge over $30 tried to come through. AJ would get a call if the water rose. Outside, a single bell buoy chimed at the channel's edge, a patient sound I have trusted all my life. I stood there a moment, hand on the back of Gail's chair, and watched the harbor turn seamless with the sky. The biggest storms don't begin with wind, they begin with silence. A mist sound so small you have to lean in to notice it, and then they ask whether you remember how to hold a helm. The chowder had just settled into its quiet pop and sigh when the front door blew open without a knock. Cold harbor air knifed through the hallway, and the ladle in my hand paused mid-stir. Grant came first, cheeks wind-burned, jaw tight. Tessa a step behind, perfume sharp and citrus over the brine, riding in with them. Their footfalls cut the warmth of the kitchen as cleanly as a slit sail. Tessa spoke before the door latch caught. "Your card humiliated me." The words were clipped, polished for an audience. "Whole Foods, checkout, declined." "Twice," Grant added louder than the room required. "You changed the password and didn't tell us." I lowered the flame and wiped my hands on the old cotton towel. The house still held the day's work, the faint clam sweetness in the sink, the fern's shadow trembling on the cupboard, Gail's hand-stitched wallet resting where I'd set it after the market. "The account is mine," I said, steady as a pier piling. "I updated the password and alerts last month. IJ Meta recommended it. Asset protection." Tessa's laugh was bright and thin. "Protection from whom? Your family?" Grant planted his hands on the table, an old knot-tying stance repurposed for argument. "We're in a sprint right now. Liquidity equals opportunity. You can't wall off the only efficient path." "Requests come to me," I answered, "with receipts before the spend. No open card access." The chowder broke a soft bubble behind me. Outside, a gull pealed a long cry that the glass turned faint and metallic. I kept my shoulders square to the stove. The old trick on a bridge is to make the reflexes small and the thinking slow. This wasn't a shipping lane, but the rules still held. Tessa slid into a chair without asking, ankles crossed like a panelist ready to grade me. Those charges were household and professional, groceries, wardrobe, events that build Grant's book. We're not teenagers. She tilted her head. Older folks sometimes overcorrect. Control issues. A draft found the seam beneath the back door. I turned the knob a hair and let the flame settle. I've seen late-night authorization pings, I said. Merchant names I don't recognize. Before any further use, I need clarity. Grant's eyes flashed. So, now we need permission to buy food? To invest in what feeds the whole family? The card isn't a household utility, I said. It's my retirement line. I won't be a passive payment rail. He shook his head as if clearing spray. You're being stingy, Dad. Paranoid. The words hung in the steam. I felt them land, heavy and familiar, but I let them slide off the enamel of the moment. No, I said, I'm being specific. Passwords are tightened. Alerts are on. You'll bring requests to me in advance with documents. That's the policy. Tessa toyed with a spoon, turned it twice, set it down carefully. If you make it this hard, we'll find other options. Other options, I repeated, purely to hear the echo of it in my own mouth. The kitchen clock ticked like a patient metronome over a lesson I had somehow forgotten I knew. I placed Gail's wallet on the top shelf of the hutch and closed the glass door. Dinner's not a debate. Grant's voice flattened. You changed the password to control us. I changed it to control the account, I said. That's what grown-ups do with liabilities and assets. The stove exhaled when I turned the knob down another quarter-inch. In the little silence that followed, I heard the NOAA voice write a ragged ribbon of air from the radio in the den, barometer falling, wind veering east, small craft advisory possible after midnight. A bell buoy tolled somewhere in the mouth of the channel, 2 slow notes like a giant tapping the rim of a glass. Tessa stood, chair legs catching slightly on the tile. You embarrassed me today. I regret that, I said. I don't regret securing my accounts. Grant's jaw did the old tick from Little League summers, clinch, unclinch, a fight he never learned how to walk past. He looked toward the hall, then back at me. You'll change your mind. Not tonight, I said. I opened the front door, the draft washing a ribbon of cold across my shins. Leave for tonight. They hesitated as if a different father might suddenly appear and soften the order. When I didn't move, they stepped out into the early dark. Tessa's perfume lingered like friction after cloth has stopped moving. I closed the door, the latch clicking with a small, definite punctuation. I stood still long enough to hear my breathing even out, then returned to the stove. Chowder doesn't forgive distraction, but it will accept correction. I tasted a spoonful. It needed salt, nothing dramatic, just enough to make the broth tell the truth about the clams. I pinched a small spill into my palm and let it rain. The pot's voice settled back into a working murmur. At the table, I opened the ledger and wrote a plain line. Saturday, password changed prior, card declined, market, confrontation at home, threats of other options. I slid a yellow sticky under the pen and printed 2 tasks. Review statements tonight, call AJ in the morning. The second note I underlined and then, with another pen, drew a small box beside it. I've learned the mind likes boxes it can fill. Phone in hand, I raised the alert threshold tone to something I would hear in another room and set notifications to repeat. Then I walked to the mantel and put my fingers to the schooner's rigging. One thread had slackened during the humid weeks. A neat half-hitch returned it to purpose. Wood, cordage, attention. The trinity that keeps things standing when weather tests them. By the time I sat again, the window had turned to a dim mirror. My face looked older there than it did in the bathroom. That's what steel gray light does to a man past 65. But it was my face, and I knew the set of the mouth. Outside the harbor was a single piece of dark metal. The bell buoy tolled once more, a note that seemed to cross the room and touch my ribs before leaving. I let the sound pass through and then lifted the spoon. I planned to log in after supper and go line by line, merchant by merchant, a slow drumbeat of verification. The storm, if there was one, had announced itself not with torn shingles, but with entitlement at my table and a chill left standing in the doorway. The helm was in my hands again. I intended to keep it there. Your card embarrassed us, Tessa said, and the door clicked like a verdict. When did help turn into entitlement? I cleared the bowls, rinsed the pot until the water ran glassy, and set the ladle to dry across the sink like a quiet oar. Outside, the harbor had turned to dark steel. The bell buoy struck its patient note at irregular distances, a metronome for work that asked you to keep your hands small and your thinking steady. I pulled the chair to the kitchen table, slid the old laptop forward, and opened the ledger to a clean line. After a squall, a captain inventories the ship. This was that. The banking site accepted my new password without complaint. Two-factor pinged my phone and came back green. A J's protocols held like properly set shrouds. I printed a year's statements. The printer chuffed and burred, warm pages fanning into my palm until I had a soft brick of numbers smelling faintly of ink. I clipped the stack into quarters, groceries and utilities, medical and household, unknown merchants, late-night authorizations. On the top page, I wrote initial scan and the date. I poured a glass of water and set a yellow highlighter and a red pen at starboard and port. For the first pass, I read without anger, only with the attention I used to give a radar display in fog. Yellow for maybe, red for no. A runway of timestamps glowed along the margins. 1:37 a.m., 2:11 a.m., 3:04 a.m., times when my house sleeps and the channel goes empty. Merchant names I've never walked into blinked up like foreign beacons. A rooftop club fee, a subscription to a creator platform, cosmetics with names that sounded like perfume ads, an electronics boutique 2 towns over. I marked H for household where it could plausibly be mine, N where the answer was simple, Q where I'd need documentation. Each stroke steadied me. Skill crowds out panic the way tide covers rock. The card wallet app showed my devices. In the list sat an intruder, an Apple Pay token added 3 months ago with a label I hadn't written. I didn't talk to the screen. I removed the device, screenshotted the confirmation, and emailed the image to myself and to a folder I named Harbor Evidence. The Amazon account was worse. A sub-profile hid 2 layers deep, initials that pointed to Tessa. I revoked it, reset the password, and wrote the time in my ledger. Paper, then pixels, then paper again. Redundancy the old-fashioned way. The next step was hardening the perimeter. I clicked through the bureaus. Experian, Equifax, TransUnion. Each freeze a small gate dropping into place. Confirmation number stacked in the download bar. I filed the PDFs into a second folder labeled Harbor Security and scribbled the 3 case codes on an index card. In the bank alerts pane, I dropped the threshold to catch anything at or above $25, card present and card not present both, and added Buck as a secondary emergency contact, not access, only a name the bank could call if they couldn't reach me. The system accepted him with a polite blue checkmark. A life needs a few honest witnesses posted along the rail. Patterns begin as hum and then become chart marks, and then they introduce themselves. A repeating debit glowed out of the columns, $1,200. First week of each month, memo line, media retainer. The payee lived behind a Delaware P.O. box, an LLC name that meant nothing to me. I cross-referenced 4 months back and found the same siphon, precise as the moon. I copied the descriptor string, including the EIN, to a note I'd bring Ajay. In the margin I wrote, recurring siphon. Who set this? And tabbed each month with a red flag. The house phone rang, a sound from an earlier century that still knows how to raise the hair on my arm. The caller identified himself as a senior associate with a specialty lender and asked in a courteous voice if I could verify details on a pending asset-based line tied to my property on Wharf Street. The word pending did something peculiar in my chest, like a deck flexing. I didn't apply, I said. Freeze the application. Note my denial. He offered a case number. I wrote it down, repeated it back, and asked for an email confirming the freeze. After he hung up, I added the number to the card on my stack and stuck a yellow flag on the laptop rim. Evidence is only useful if you can find it later. I made a mini index on a note card. A. Device removal screenshots. B. Freeze confirmations. C. Statements YTD. D. Lender case email. E. Recurring debit printouts. I numbered the folders to match. Overcautious, perhaps, but a habit that has delivered me and my cruise home more than once. Memory cross-currents come when the brain is working properly. I saw Grant at my chart table in the ferry's wheelhouse, 12 years old, with a pencil behind his ear, taking 3 bearings to make a triangle. "That's your fix," I told him then. "Time, bearings, position, trust what agrees." The metaphor arrived intact. Money, time, location. If they don't make a triangle, something else is steering. I set the thought aside to ask for receipts next week and kept my eyes on the stack. Language is a keel in heavy water. On a legal pad, I drafted 2 sentences I would read verbatim in any room, no matter the weather. My card is not a household utility. All requests must be pre-approved with documentation. I underlined them once and then again, the tip of the pen leaving a tiny blot I didn't mind. I scheduled an appointment on Monday morning with AJ, attached the EIN string, the lender case number, and a PDF of the repeating debits to the calendar event. On my phone, I set Do Not Disturb, allowing calls from Ajay, from Buck, and from Dr. Elena Park. I checked the deadbolt by habit, placed Gail's wallet behind the glass in the hutch, and left the ledger open to a fresh line that only said Continue. At the window, fog pushed across the harbor lights in a slow sheet, erasing edges I know by heart. Drift had become current. I acknowledged it the way you acknowledge the first strong pull of an outgoing tide, not with panic, but by bracing my stance and trimming what can be trimmed. I switched off the kitchen light. The printer's stack was still warm in my hand, the ink tacky enough to shine. It felt like intention. If you're still watching and this stirred something, type 1 below so I know you're with me. Keep watching. The calm won't last. Fog folded itself around the house as Saturday bled into Sunday, the bell buoy's low note pacing the dark like a watchman who refused to tire. I cleared the table, shut the laptop for a breath, then opened it again and slid my ledger beside it. Discovery without discipline is just noise. I needed a log. I dated a fresh page and began to ladder the day, time of the market decline, the confrontation at my kitchen table, the 4 months of a $1,200 media retainer, the unfamiliar Apple Pay token I had removed, the buried Amazon sub-profile, the specialty lender's pending line against the house, the 3 freeze confirmations, the alert thresholds I'd tightened. Each entry got a brief, neutral sentence and a reference code that mapped to a folder in Harbor Evidence. Paper first, then pixels, then paper again. If a thing matters, it should be able to stand in 2 places at once. When the page held its shape, I opened the doorbell camera archive. A calendar grid bloomed, thumbnails stamped by night vision's sour green. I scrolled back to 2 dates I'd been out, one for physical therapy, one for an errand across town. There they were. Tessa in a dark hoodie, tote bag slung high, entering my door on a late weeknight. The overlay showed 2:03 a.m. and 2:18 a.m. The clips were short, the kind of ordinary footage no one notices until it lines up with numbers on a statement. I exported both, saved them to the evidence folder, and wrote their file hashes on index cards. Chain of custody habits don't hurt anyone. Proactive is easier than defensive. I drafted an email to Dr. Elena Park, my GP, requesting a cognitive screening to establish a dated baseline, MOCA or whatever tool she preferred. I framed it the way sailors frame maintenance, not an emergency, just routine diligence on gear you trust. I printed the summary from my last annual and clipped it to the appointment request. Memory, after all, deserved the same respect I gave a compass. AJ's checklist sat on top of the hutch in a manila folder, edges softened by handling. In the margins of the last page, he'd written a handful of lines that weren't about software. Keep correspondence factual. Never argue money in a doorway. No back and forth by text after 9 p.m. Don't disclose evidence prematurely. Close valves. Don't escalate the sea state. I underlined the last one and let the pen rest. If I expected discipline from the ocean, I could offer it to my own house. Soft glove first. I drafted a 2-paragraph message to Grant and Tessa. The card is not a household utility. All requests must be pre-approved with documentation. Current access is closed until clarity. I will review any specific need case by case. I asked them to reply with a list of pending essentials with receipts. The tone was not angry, not pleading. It read like rules taped to the bulkhead. I sent it and watched the timestamp drop into the outbox with the same small satisfaction I get from a knot that lays flat. Grant's reply landed within minutes. Let professionals handle it. Tessa forwarded a blurred photo of a grocery cart and the word household no receipt, no list, only a posture. I archived both, logged the exchange in the incident log, and did not answer. The bank branch was dark at this hour, but their voicemail could still hold a place for me. I called and stated my name, my account, and my request. That any inquiries about title or collateral from third parties trigger an immediate call to me, and that no verbal confirmations be offered to anyone but me. I spoke slowly, spelled my email twice, and asked for notes to be placed on file. Then I wrote the time, the number, and the name of the manager on duty into the log. The code to the wall safe I changed next, the new sequence was sliding under my fingers without sentiment. Monday morning I would move the spare house key to the safe deposit box. Scheduled, not executed, another line in the ladder. I crossed the yard and knocked on Buck Lawson's door. He answered in a heavy sweater, the room behind him warm with the smell of oil and rope. I told him I might have documents delivered or served and asked if he'd be present on my porch as a witness if it happened. No arguing, just eyes and time. He nodded once. Phone on speaker, he said. I nodded back. Video if needed. We didn't need more words. We had a plan. Sunday leaned in through the fog and with it the mail. Through the slot slid a crisp envelope from a Boston law firm. Their letter was polite and chilly. Words like financial capacity and potential conservatorship options. An invitation to a meeting. I photographed each page, logged the letter into the incident log, and filed the original in an accordion folder labeled by month. My reply was a single line asking that all communications be routed to me by email for the record. No substance, no debate in a doorway. You can't sail forever without a horizon. I set a 90-day line in the log. Resolve amicably if possible. Demand receipts, ask AJ to trace the Delaware LLC, complete Dr. Park's baseline, and keep every valve closed. Day 90 would be the point to escalate to counsel and court if cooperation died on the vine. I wrote the date out longhand and boxed it with a pencil so the line could be erased and moved if peace surprised me. Language keeps a keel under you in heavy chop. On an index card, I copied the sentences I'd drafted last night. My card is not a household utility. All requests must be pre-approved with documentation. I added a third and underlined it. Please put that in writing. Cards went into the pocket of my jacket where my thumb could find them by feel. Breath needs anchors. The fridge hummed, steady as a generator at 3/4. The bell buoy's notes seeped through the window glass. Behind the hutch glass, Gail's stitched wallet caught a dim reflection. I matched my breathing to the bell. Slow in, slower out, then imagined trimming sail instead of reefing in panic. Soft glove did not mean lax. It meant smaller canvas, a bow pointed into chop, and a hand that stayed off the tiller except to correct. On the calendar I stacked Monday morning tight. Bank stop, safe deposit box, meeting with AJ, call to Dr. Park's office, draft emails to request merchant copies for flagged transactions, printouts packed in a folder labeled with today's date. Do not disturb remained on, allowing calls from AJ, from Buck, and from Dr. Park. I wiped the desk with a dry cloth until the grain felt clean under my palm and placed the incident log on top. Night thickened. I checked the live view from the porch camera once more. Wet railing, empty steps, fog pushed to lace by a light breeze, then clicked it off. The plan was light touch but not loose. Valves closed, records made, witnesses posted. I heard in my head a line I trusted as much as any star. Steer small, keep keel under you, and let the other boat show its wake. I arrived 10 minutes early and took the corner booth that let me watch both the door and the street. Old habit, back to the wall, line of sight clear, exits mapped with the ease a captain reads a harbor. The diner smelled like hot coffee and salt fat, and the vinyl seat gave a small squeak as I slid in. Behind the counter, a laminated chart of local shoals hung a little crooked, the same banks I used to thread at dawn. Outside, Fog lifted in ragged banners, leaving the harbor a plate of dull steel. I set a legal pad on the table and laid a pin across it, the way a carpenter puts a square down before he measures. Grant arrived at the exact minute we had agreed to, as if punctuality were proof of certainty. Tessa followed, flawless and composed, phone in hand, eyes taking stock of the room. They sat without small talk, and for a heartbeat we listened to the bell over the door and the friar's hush. The waitress poured coffee. I let the steam touch my face and breathed slow until the cup stopped trembling in my hand. Grant started by naming me: control issues, embarrassment at a checkout line, risk to momentum. Tessa salted the air with household brand stability as if language could dissolve math. I lowered my gaze to the legal pad and read the 2 sentences I had written the night before so I wouldn't improvise. My card is not a household utility. All requests must be pre-approved with documentation, I added, with the same even tone that I had updated passwords and alerts on AJ Mehta's advice as standard asset protection. Nothing punitive. Just sound seamanship on land. I slid a folder across the Formica. Tabs marked 4 months of a $1,200 media retainer paid to a Delaware LLC with a P.O. box, a short list of late-night authorizations, screenshots confirming the removal of an unfamiliar Apple Pay device and the revocation of an Amazon sub-profile, dates, amounts, descriptors. No adjectives. Grant skimmed as if he were speed-reading a menu and said the retainer was branding and pipeline. Tessa pointed at club fees and creator platform charges and called them professional image. I asked for invoices. They offered generalities. I repeated without heat, documentation, then discussion. The waitress refilled the cups. We thanked her like strangers who happened to share a table. I kept my reveal small. From my jacket pocket, I produced my phone and tapped a doorbell clip, 10 seconds with no audio. Tessa entering my house at 2:03 a.m., timestamp squared in the corner like a stamp on a manifest. I said only the facts, date, time, my absence. She called it grabbing pantry items, long story, and turned the shame valve. "You're recording your family?" she asked, eyebrows high. I looked at the coffee and said nothing, because the camera had been there long before this conversation and because facts do not answer to tone. Grant's posture flattened into the plank I knew from his bad Little League days. He used the words paranoid and unsafe with money. He suggested we consider a professional solution and let a court decide, the kind of sentence meant to sound reasonable while putting a boot on a throat. Tessa added a clean line about older folks and slipping judgment, the way a consultant drops a slide into a deck, hoping font choice will sell the premise. I kept to the center line. Card access is closed. Requests require pre-approval and receipts. History is not today's weather. I slid a printed copy of my email policy across the table and told them to keep it for their files. Then I closed the folder, set cash under the saucer to pay for 3 coffees, and stood. "Dinner at my house is not a debate," I said, "and this booth isn't either." I noted the time in my pocket notebook and left first, out into the flat gray light that makes the harbor look like a sheet of pewter waiting for a hammer. On the sidewalk, I called AJ from the curb. I gave him a tight summary, told him I would upload the PDFs and the doorbell clip to our shared folder. He said exactly what a steady man says when a sea turns foul. No more live debates, all requests in writing, valves shut, expect escalation. I hung up and felt the phone heavier than its ounces, as if it had absorbed a little of the morning's gravity and kept it for me. Escalation arrived by email before dark. A Boston law firm introduced itself as counsel for Grant and attached a notice of intent to seek temporary conservatorship. The attachment included a physician letter asserting concerns about my cognition. The tone was clipped and procedural, confident in the way a form letter is, because the form has done this many times before. I forwarded the attachment to Dr. Elena Park with a single sentence asking if it was hers. She replied within the hour. It was not. The formatting and signature were wrong. She had never written such a statement and would be happy to document that. The word forgery did not appear in her email, but it tolled through the room like a bell buoy struck by a harder swell. I called AJ back and then called the non-emergency number for the police. At AJ's direction, I captured the full headers from the email, exported the letter, and uploaded everything to harbor_evidence. The patrol sergeant took a report for suspected medical document forgery and identity misuse and gave me a case number. I wrote it twice, in the incident log and on an index card that I clipped to the printed letter with a small black binder clip. Then I scheduled an expedited cognitive screening with Dr. Park. Baseline, dated, clean. I widened the evidence index and added 2 entries, forged_MD letter and counsel_notice. I drafted a 1-line reply to the law firm acknowledging receipt and directing all communications to me by email for the record. No argument, no doorway. I called Buck to put him on standby in case someone decided to serve me at home. He said he'd keep his coat by the door and his phone on the table. At dusk, I walked to the harbor rail and watched the tide turn under the pilings, the surface wrinkling where the ebb met the last of the incoming. All afternoon, I had felt the shift from drift to current, from family weather to open water. Naming it helped. Panic burns fuel you need for the long leg. Posture saves it. I put my hands on the cold metal rail until the feeling returned to my fingertips, and the bell out at the channel struck its measured note. War had been declared in legal letterhead. My pace would remain the same, hull square, keel deep, records clean, counsel next. I sat at the kitchen table until the house cooled and the fog thinned to lace. The incident log lay open, the pen balanced across its spine. 2 roads ran through my head with the indifferent clarity of a tide table: keep the peace by paying for it, or shut every valve and steer into the head sea. I listed the costs on a legal pad as if they belonged to a maintenance plan: money, dignity, sleep, the chance of ever speaking like a father and son again. When the page was full, I turned to a clean sheet and wrote a single line, dated and signed it the way I used to mark a captain's log. Proceed to protect assets, health, and name through counsel and record. At 7 sharp, I called Meredith Shaw, the elder law attorney AJ had flagged. Her assistant answered on the second ring. By 7:08, I had an intake slot and a secure upload link. I zipped the harbor evidence set: statements, screenshots of device removals, the recurring debit printouts, the lender case number, the forged physician letter, 2 doorbell clips, and watched the progress bar crawl like a tug in a swell. Meredith replied minutes later with a checklist and a tone I recognized from wheelhouses: preservation first, posture calm, paperwork clean. She attached a draft cease and desist, a reply template to opposing counsel, and a set of steps in case harassment required a temporary protective order. When the bank doors unlocked at 9, I was already at the branch. The manager walked me to her desk and listened while I laid out instructions as plainly as I could. We added a verbal passphrase to every account. She flagged no verbal confirmations to anyone but me, placed an identity verify in branch note across the profile, and blocked new authorized users absent in-person verification. She checked the property file. No liens had been filed. I wrote each change into the log and underlined the time twice. From there, I went straight to the safe deposit room. The spare house key, a photocopy of the deed, my passport, Gail's will, and one of the old insurance riders went into the box. I updated a small inventory card, closed the drawer, and logged the visit time. Back home, I changed the keypad code again and sealed the new sequence in an envelope for Meredith, then moved the sealed envelope into a folder marked Emergency, Counsel Only. Meredith's templates carried me through the next leg. I sent preservation of records emails to the payment processor handling the Delaware LLC's retainer, the Rooftop Club, the Creator Platform, and the Electronics Boutique, formal requests for receipts, IP logs, device IDs, and time-stamped authorization data tied to the disputed charges. Each message was copied to Meredith's archive. Each confirmation email landed in harbor_evidence with a file name that would make sense to a stranger 6 months from now. At home, I upgraded each credit bureau freeze to an extended fraud alert and attached the police report number from the forged letter case. I requested mailed confirmations, not just email, and filed a USPS hold/forward safeguard to block change of address tricks that reroute bills into someone else's hands. the confirmation stacked in my inbox like folded charts. Dr. Elena Park replied between patients. She had a slot midweek for a cognitive screening and would send a letter to Meredith stating that she had never written the physician letter attached to the conservatorship notice and that I had no diagnosis of cognitive impairment. I printed her email, clipped it to the appointment card, and slid both under the incident log. Baselines save work in heavy weather. This one would too. Witness nets matter. I briefed Buck on porch protocol and asked him to keep his phone charged. Then I walked to the harbor office and spoke to Tom Keegan, the harbor master I've known since his first year on the job. I told him I might need a second set of eyes if papers or people started arriving at odd hours. He tapped his wristwatch and nodded. No speeches, just timestamps and presence. We shook hands like men who've both seen hulls split when conversation replaces preparation. Meredith's email included a rule I pressed to my jacket pocket on a 3-sentence card. No voice calls with Grant or Tessa. Email only. 2-line replies. Acknowledge receipt, request documentation, and nothing else. I copied the lines I had already been living by. My card is not a household utility. All requests must be pre-approved with documentation. Please put that in writing. And tuck the card behind my wallet like a fuse I hope not to light. I opened a new checking account at a separate bank and moved the autopays that keep a house breathing, heat, lights, insurance, over there. The old account would remain for monitoring. I dropped the daily limits on my existing card and requested a replacement number to be picked up in person at the branch. Nothing dramatic, just less sail and a building breeze. AJ called mid-afternoon with the first line on the Delaware LLC. Public filings pointed to a registered agent and a Boston P.O. box that belonged to a co-working mailroom. He drafted an affidavit summarizing the recurring debits and began an index that would feed discovery if we got that far. "We will," he said, voice level. I answered copy and logged the call. Before dusk, I stood at the mantel and touched Gail's stitched wallet through the glass. I said it out loud because saying it matters. I will not buy closeness with money again. The bell buoy tolled once from the channel, its sound finding the bones behind my ribs and setting them in a steadier rhythm. I breathed to that beat until the muscle under my breastbone loosened a fraction. By late afternoon, Meredith had filed our first moves, a notice disputing the forged letter, a demand that opposing counsel preserve all communications with Grant and Tessa, a formal response declining any conservatorship claim pending medical baseline, and a reminder that harassment would trigger a protective order. I printed the filed stamps and slid them into the accordion folder labeled by month. At the table, I wrote the day's heading atop the incident log, course set, keel down. It looked simple in ink, which is how a good heading should look. I locked the door, pocketed the witness card, and stepped into the Monday light with the slow, exact pace of a man who has chosen his line and means to hold it. The courthouse held the kind of cold that climbs through wool. Tuesday, 2 weeks after the diner, the wind came off the harbor with a knife edge and drove a gray ceiling low over Portland. Marble made our footsteps louder than we were. Meredith walked beside me, tote strap crossing her coat, calm as if we were headed into a routine staff meeting. AJ met us at security with a nod and a hand to the canvas bag carrying my incident log and the binder I'd indexed to within an inch of its life. Buck waited in the hallway with a thermos and a mechanic's patience, rough knit cap in his hands. I touched the stitched corner of the binder to quiet my fingers the way I tap a bulkhead before weather. The courtroom smelled of old varnish and paper. Shoe soles squeaked. A clerk called the morning, and the judge took the bench with a measured cadence that told you he liked things squared and labeled. Grant sat 2 rows back. He watched a spot above my shoulder as if the ceiling might explain him. Tessa's posture was boardroom perfect, jaw a touch tight. Opposing counsel announced himself crisply and said he represented my son and his wife. The docket line used a phrase that had turned my house into a ship under warning: temporary conservatorship. They framed me as a man slipping, declining judgment, unsafe spending, confusion. They held up a physician letter like a badge, words in black on white, tone clinical and detached. The list of household and brand investments read as if a family could be reduced to bullet points and a debit card. Meredith's opening lasted the length of a steady breath. She said I was competent. She said the petition followed my cutoff of unauthorized access. She told the court what she would show: a forged medical letter, a recurring siphon of $1,200 to a Delaware LLC, doorbell clips of late-night entries, a lender's call about a line of credit I never sought, an incident log written like a captain's book. She did not raise her voice. She stacked facts. Evidence started with the letter. Meredith submitted Dr. Elena Park's sworn declaration. The document wasn't hers. The formatting and signature were wrong. She had no clinical basis to suspect impairment. The judge read longer than I expected. When he looked up, the line of his mouth had moved a fraction. He noted the potential for document fraud. Opposing counsel asked to reserve argument. The frown stayed. AJ took the stand and talked like a man who deals in numbers and doesn't ask them to sing. He outlined the monthly media retainer to a Delaware LLC with a P.O. box, a debit that arrived like the tide. He pointed to late-night authorizations out of step with my habits. He described the hardening steps and the extended fraud alerts, and he mentioned the lender who called to verify an asset-based line I never applied for. He didn't guess motives. He gave the pattern. Meredith played 2 doorbell clips, each 10 seconds, no sound, only the scalpel of a timestamp. Tessa entered my house at 2:03 and 2:18 a.m. on dates I was away. Meredith supplied the bare facts and sat down. The judge asked their side for an explanation. We got pantry items and permission implied. The words drifted just short of the bench and fell. We put the log up next, pages with dates and neutral sentences, preservation letters, credit bureau confirmations, bank flags, copies of the emails routed to counsel. The narrative was unadorned, not paranoia, procedure. Opposing counsel pressed AJ on hypotheticals. Could a media retainer be legitimate? He allowed that it could with invoices and deliverables, of which there were none. They suggested I recorded family. Meredith answered that the camera predated any dispute and that a doorbell isn't surveillance so much as common sense. Dr. Park joined by phone and spoke in a calm clinician's cadence. She confirmed a midweek cognitive screening on the books, recounted 15 years of normal annual exams, and restated that she had never authored the letter attached to the petition. The judge admitted her declaration into the record and said the weight would follow the evidence. He denied the temporary conservatorship. He ordered no access by Grant or Tessa to my financial instruments, no contact outside counsel, and production within 14 days of all invoices, contracts, and communications tied to the LLC and the so-called brand expenses. He reserved the question of contempt and harassment for later filings. The gavel's rap sounded smaller than the relief that unknotted my jaw. In the corridor, my knees went a little watery with the come-down. Meredith said this was one leg of a longer passage, and AJ ticked off the next tasks. Trace the EIN, push processors for logs. Line up IP data. Buck put a hand to my shoulder and squeezed once, a gesture like a cleat hitch. Nothing florid, everything held. On the way out, Buck peeled away for coffee and came back with a square of paper he'd lifted from a bulletin board by the cart. A pawn ticket from Commercial Street listing a Hamilton vintage watch that matched the one my father left me, the watch I hadn't been able to find since spring. The ticket named a seller. Initials and last name, T. Quinn. The heat reached my palm before the paper did. We walked to the pawn shop on Commercial, bells on the door tinkling a holiday that didn't match the air. Glass cases hummed under fluorescent light. On gray felt lay the Hamilton serial number matching the one in my folder. The clerk produced the intake form, name, date, payout. Meredith photographed each page. We paid the pawn plus the fee and took a receipt. The metal lay in my hand too warm, as if it had been worked through someone else's pulse, and carried the story of that trip. Theft of money is arithmetic. Theft of memory is a heat you don't forget. Back on the sidewalk, Meredith dictated a supplemental notice as we walked. By afternoon, she'd filed it. Recovered family property pawned under Tessa's name, photos, receipt, serial attached. AJ's phone buzzed with a reply from a processor. crypto exchange transfers linked to the Delaware LLC, metadata referencing a Boston co-working mailroom P.O. box. He flagged it for subpoenas. I wrote crypto drain in the margin of the log and drew a thin box around the words. At home, I set the Hamilton beside the model schooner, time and passage back within arm's reach, relief pooled with something quieter and darker. Theft tries to edit a life by small excisions, the missing watch, the empty line on a bank page, the eroded boundary at a door. I wrote, "Return achieved, trust not," and dated the line. I added the pawn shop to the preservation letter list, asked for surveillance stills, intake video, cash drawer logs. I forwarded everything to Meredith and filed the receipts where a stranger could find them later. Night came on clean and colder, the wind veering to a truer north. I acknowledged the costs, legal bills, a son slipping astern, a lineage nicked, but felt my keel true underfoot. I laid the watch in the drawer and closed it softly. Then I took one line in the incident log and gave it the simplest words I had. Hearing held, keel held. If you're still watching and tracking the fallout, drop in one below so I know you're with me. Don't go anywhere. The aftermath carries its own twist. The week after the hearing opened clear and cold, the wind drained a fog and sharpened to something that made the harbor look honest. I laid the court order, my incident log, and Meredith's task list across the kitchen table and drew 3 columns with a pencil. Recover, prevent, document. Under recover, I wrote the Delaware retainer and pawned property. Under prevent, I wrote passphrase, title alerts, address locks. Under document, everything else. Dates went in a thin right-hand gutter. Initials beside each line kept me from pretending a task belonged to someone else. Meredith and I drafted a settlement offer with language that could sit in daylight. Repay $28,500 over 24 months. Schedule attached. Return of all property, acknowledging that the Hamilton was already back in my drawer. Fees and costs to date reimbursed. Written no access and no contact pledge. Future requests routed through counsel with documentation. Acceptance window, 10 business days. I read it aloud once and signed. It wasn't a sermon. It was a bridge that could hold weight if someone chose to cross it. AJ pushed the crypto thread. Preservation demands went to the payment processor, the exchange, and the Boston co-working mailroom that sheltered the Delaware LLC's P.O. box. He asked for IP logs, device fingerprints, and KYC entries that could put names under the masks. I logged each outgoing note and confirmation, 1 per line, because paper remembers without bias. Meredith's templates carried my signature to merchants I'd never met. The Rooftop Club received a request for itemized receipts, timestamps, card-present signatures, and CCTV stills over the late-night windows. The Creator platform got the same, along with device IDs tied to the account that billed my card. The electronics boutique was asked for cashier IDs and any video over the hours in question. I copied the case number to every subject line and filed their auto-replies in harbor_evidence. I spent a morning rechecking the new unlinked checking account. Utilities showed as scheduled, the insurer's draft date matched the ledger. E-bill only routed to my email. At the branch, I asked for a written recap of the title inquiry alert and the placement of my verbal passphrase. The manager sent a letter that afternoon. It went into the accordion folder with the court order and Buck's witness card. USPS confirmed the hold forward lock. I printed the confirmation and, for good measure, added a credit monitoring alert that would flag any change of address request. The stack of paper on my table wasn't victory, it was ballast against drift. Protocol lives better when it's laminated. I met Tom Keegan at the harbor office and walked him through the 2-man porch plan with Buck. Phone on speaker, time-stamped photo of any envelope, no commentary. Simple as safe, Tom said. Simple as repeatable, I answered. Back home, I printed the steps, ran the card through my old laminator, and hung it inside the door where nerves can't erase memory. Midweek, I sat across from Dr. Park under fluorescence and took a cognitive screening with the same attention I used to give a pre-trip checklist. Numbers backward, animals named, lines copied, clock drawn. My score landed within normal for age. She sent Meredith a signed letter, capacity intact. I had never been diagnosed with impairment. The physician letter attached to the petition wasn't hers. A copy went to my binder. The original went to storage with a yellow flag on top. Routine is a way of telling yourself you still live in your own house. I rejoined the seniors rowing group at dawn. Oars bit cold water and the cox's voice came low and even. Stroke by stroke, the shoreline slid the way it's supposed to. My lungs worked, my mind loosened, the harbor stopped looking like a ledger and returned to being a bay. That afternoon, I wrote a note to Grant by hand to be routed through Meredith. 2 paragraphs, no moralizing. I acknowledged pain, stated the repair path, repayment, on terms offered and documented conduct over time, and said I would not buy closeness with money. After obligations are met, I wrote, we can have a coffee and talk about the weather. The door wasn't open. It was ajar, and only from my side. Responses trickled in the way winter mail does. From Tessa, silence via counsel, no documents the first week. From Grant, an email through his attorney at 11:47 p.m. Regret expressed, vague on repayment, asking whether a reduced figure was possible. Meredith replied with the settlement terms unchanged and a reminder of the court's 14-day production order. I logged both and color-coded the deadlines. The pawn shop sent surveillance stills and a link to intake video. I downloaded them, verified timestamps against the ticket, and logged the serial and clerk's name. I exported a clean doorbell timeline from my archive. Dates, times, clip IDs, and appended SHA hashes the way AJ taught me, not because I expect a storm to break that hard, but because I've learned storms prefer men who skip tie-downs. Whispers drifted along Commercial Street like smoke from a damp fire. A look held too long at the post office, a sotto voce comment near the bait shop. I let the court order and Dr. Park's letter speak where I would not. In the log I wrote, silence is not surrender, it is posture. At the parish hall, Meredith and I stood before 36 seniors and gave a short talk we called Asset Protection without the capital letters. We didn't give legal advice. We offered habits, passphrases, freezes, alerts, trusted contacts, and the discipline of writing things down. I told the group about 3 bearings: money, time, location. If they don't make a triangle, I said, something else is steering. Nods traveled the room like small waves. Before bed, I plotted a 60-day calendar on one sheet. Processor responses due, court production deadline, Dr. Park's letter on file, crypto KYC window, settlement expiry. I set digital reminders and clipped the paper to the front of the log. The Hamilton sat beside the model schooner while I did it, a quiet company of time and passage, and when I finished, I put the watch back in the drawer. Night came through the window clean and colder. The harbor's skin tightened. The bell out at the channel gave a low, exact note. Mercy and access are not the same thing. Resolution is a narrow channel. You pass it by keeping your keel in the center and your wake small. 6 weeks after the parish hall talk, winter light came down clean and hard, the harbor bright as a sheet of hammered tin. Wind light, tide unhurried. I set my coffee beside the incident log and wrote the date in the margin. Final orders, week. The line steadied my hand the way a cleat steadies a line, simple, necessary, not poetic. By noon, Meredith's courier dropped a fat envelope. The stamp across the top said it in a voice Marble would respect. Conservatorship petition denied with prejudice. The order did 3 more things while it was already standing. Entered a civil restitution judgment for $28,500 plus fees, confirmed no contact except through counsel for 12 months, and compelled production within 10 days of all accounting tied to the Delaware LLC. Missed the deadline, meet sanctions. I ran a finger under each clause, then filed the original where it belonged and the copy where my hands would find it. AJ called to translate order into mechanics. Wage garnishment from Grant's contracting income would fund the judgment. Any distributions recovered from the LLC could be attached. If payment slipped, the schedule escalated automatically. I drew a one-page recovery tracker, line items by month, a thin box for each check, a gutter for notes. Numbers move better when they have grooves to run in. Subpoenas returned like tide coming back under the pilings. The payment processor and the co-working mailroom produced KYC that named Tessa Quinn as the beneficial owner of the Delaware LLC. Device IDs matched the late-night authorizations. Meredith filed to attach the judgment to the LLC account. The crypto exchange remitted a partial liquidation to the court registry. I noted receipt numbers in the log and added 2 words I reserve for days when paper behaves. Chain holds. A J called to translate order into mechanics. Wage garnishment from Grant's contracting income would fund the judgment. Any distributions recovered from the LLC could be attached. If payment slipped, the schedule escalated automatically. I drew a one-page recovery tracker, line items by month, a thin box for each check, a gutter for notes. Numbers move better when they have grooves to run in. Subpoenas returned like tide coming back under the pilings. The payment processor and the co-working mailroom produced KYC that named Tessa Quinn as the beneficial owner of the Delaware LLC. Device IDs matched the late-night authorizations. Meredith filed to attach the judgment to the LLC account. The crypto exchange remitted a partial liquidation to the court registry. I noted receipt numbers in the log and added 2 words I reserve for days when paper behaves. Chain holds. Merchants ticked off replies. The rooftop club sent CCTV stills of Tessa walking in and out, timestamps clear as bells. The creator platform returned device fingerprints that mapped to her phone. The electronics boutique confirmed a card-present purchase by Grant during one of those weeks I'd written "drift" in the margin. I stamped each entry closed, verified, and updated the loss ledger. Some reversed, some paid, none ignored. On the criminal side, the forged physician letter case moved to a DA review queue. Meredith told me the pace would be the pace. We should make no comment and keep our filings clean. I wrote the case number twice and moved on. Civil relief fixes the leak. Criminal outcomes, if they come, adjust the weather report. Dr. Park's signed capacity letter became part of the court file. Meredith sent me a certified copy for my estate folder. I slid it in behind Gail's will and wrote a quiet thank you to Dr. Park on the same stationery I used for condolence notes. Medicine is one of the last crafts that still trusts paper. With Ajay and Meredith, I spent a morning tightening the boat I live in. We finalized an updated revocable trust, tuned the successor trustee instructions, set a durable power of attorney with strict triggers, added transfer on death titles, and built a calendar to renew fraud alerts before they age out. In the log, I wrote "valve set" and underlined it once. Through counsel, I sent Grant 1 page, the court's order restated, the repayment schedule laid out, and a dignity clause that said what I needed without preaching. You are my son. Repayment is not banishment. Earned contact follows, kept commitments. His reply, through his attorney, was not an apology letter. It was a signature on the plan and a certified check for the first installment. I didn't ask words to do the work of conduct. I wrote, "Behavior is statement," and checked the first box on the tracker. Tessa's side produced late and partial, as if time could be coaxed into respecting posture. Meredith moved for sanctions. The court fined her and ordered full production. I recorded the docket entry because a man who pilots by rumor runs aground. In a small town, the truth travels as slowly and surely as a tide. Without speeches, the court's order and Dr. Park's letter found their way to the church board and the harbor office. Whispers receded, the bait shop hello warmed by a degree. I didn't need vindication, only a stable peer. I noted, facts are docs. Rumor is tide. A second pawn receipt surfaced from a different shop across town. Meredith harvested a pearl tie pin my father wore on the rare evenings a ferry captain needs a tie. I set it in the drawer beside the Hamilton. Lineage reshelved, I wrote, and closed the wood with 2 fingers, not a slam. The parish hall filled again for a repeat session on asset protection. Meredith kept the law out of it and the habits in it. I added a short piece on preservation letters and device logs and told the room the same thing I tell myself by the sink. 3 bearings: money, time, location. If they don't make a triangle, something else is steering. Applause tried to climb the walls. I pointed to the checklist and the pins and let the noise go where it wanted without me. At dusk, I walked the pier and rehearsed the double truth out loud where gulls, not neighbors, could hear it. Legal victories don't patch a hull where trust has sprung a seam. Boundaries keep the boat afloat until time and conduct can be measured again. I refuse to rewrite my history to remove Grant. I also refuse to rent my future for the cost of a warm sentence. Somewhere between those decisions, a man learns how to stand up straight. A counsel-routed texted photo from Grant hit my phone before bed, a receipt for an on-time payment, and the words, "working extra shifts." "Will stay current," I replied through Meredith with two words that felt exactly the right size. Received. Continue. House rhythm returned without flourish. Autopays ran from the new account. Alerts stayed quiet. The doorbell camera caught only deliveries in gull shadow. I oiled the model schooner's stand, rewound the Hamilton, and set both where they anchor the room. The old things didn't fix the new world, but they held it still enough for me to breathe. I closed the incident log for this phase with one line. Orders entered. Recovery begun. Valves closed. Wake small. A paper band around the filled notebook kept its pages from talking. I stored it beside the harbor evidence binder and slipped an index card into my pocket labeled "What I Learned to Keep." Time, boundaries, written records, modest routines, the right witnesses. Slackwater caught the harbor and held it. Between ebb and flood, the surface went almost absent, a rare quiet where a boat sits true on her own line. I stood in that clean cold and let my breath even out. Not an end exactly, enough of a pause to know I'd steered the narrow channel without scraping stone. Early spring put frost on the shingles and a thin glitter on the deck rail, the harbor brightening from pewter to the pale metal of a new dime. I opened the hutch and lifted Gail's stitched wallet from behind the glass, more ritual than need, then set it beside a new blank ledger stamped in small letters. Post orders. This was not victory so much as accounting. I meant to write down what returned, what did not, and what I intended to keep. Some things came back with the feel of objects that had been out in weather. The Hamilton ticked with its unhurried authority. The pearl type-in lay where a thumb knows to find it. A partial crypto liquidation posted to the court registry with a stingy decimal face. Restitution checks began to arrive on schedule. Green paper passing into black ink on the tracker I drew 2 months ago. Assets back are not the same as trust back. I recorded them anyway because a ledger is for facts, not feelings. Some things did not return. The easy way of speaking with my son, for one. The old fantasy that money could stitch a family if you fed it like a sewing machine, for another. The habit of leaving doors figuratively unlocked because I preferred to think of us as a house where anyone could walk in. I wrote their names under a thin line and left the column blank for amounts. Not everything that counts fits in a sum. My name and health held. Dr. Park's screening sits in the file where Gail's will rests. Dates, scores, her clean signature stating what needed saying and nothing more. The forged letter case sits with the DA, moving at a pace government keeps for itself. Reputation repairs by steady facts over time. It does not respond to speeches. I've learned to let paper speak and to let silence finish the thought. We tuned the ship I live in so it can ride a storm even if I can't answer the door. The trust is updated. The successor trustee instructions point like arrows instead of wishful thinking. The durable power of attorney has triggers that require 2 signatures and a physician's letter, not rumor and a pen. Transfer on death titles sit like tidy knots across the lines that used to tangle. A calendar to renew fraud alerts is taped inside the cupboard where the tea lives. I wrote "valve set" at the top of a page and underlined it once. Some rules earned ink big enough to tape inside the ledger's cover. 3 bearings: money, time, location. If they don't form a triangle, steer by records, not by plea. I copied it on an index card and slid a duplicate into my wallet. Another card carries a sentence I once thought mean and now call care. My card is not a household utility. Pre-approval plus documentation isn't cruelty. It's how love refuses to become a subsidy for harm. I marked the places I failed before, open-ended help, late-night yeses, and wrote never again without ceremony. Witnesses in writing kept the keel under me. Buck's hand on my shoulder after the hearing didn't need words. Tom Keegan's delivery protocol hangs laminated by the door, proof against adrenaline and forgetfulness. AJ's checklists, Meredith's filings, Dr. Park's sentences, their crafts braided into a rope strong enough to hold through gusts I didn't predict. If ballast has names, those are some of them. Mercy and access are not synonyms. Mercy is a door ajar. Access is a key. I can offer the first without handing over the second. The settlement offer's spirit remains standing where it was put, contact earned by conduct, not by apology alone. I keep the door at the same angle no matter the weather, not slammed, not flung. Community work found a quiet cadence. The parish hall hosts a monthly session on habits that keep a person upright when a strong hand rocks the table. We talk passphrases and freezes, alerts and trusted contacts, preservation letters and device logs. I show the room the 3 bearings triangle with a carpenter's pencil on a flip chart and then step back. The questions have become practical. The rumors have thinned. I point people to the laminated checklist and let their pens do the clapping. Through counsel, I sent Grant a short note that matched the size of what I can hold. On-time payments are noted. I am willing to have coffee on your birthday if the schedule remains current. No sermon on the back, no baited hook. A picture came the next week, a stamped second payment, and a line, still current. Extra shift tonight, I felt pride's rise meet Aka's gravity in the chest. Then I wrote the behavior down and did not predict the future. Tessa's orbit faded the way a boat loses definition as fog lifts. Sanctions stand. Full production finally arrived after the court made the clock louder. Her counsel signaled an intent to settle her portion of the judgment. I recorded the docket entry and left the page quiet. I do not gloat at a ledger, I total it. At home, ordinary time has returned as a chosen practice. Saturday chowder bubbles with its old soft voice. NOAA murmurs the weather in the background while I scrub a pot. The doorbell camera catches deliveries in gull shadow instead of commotion. I oil the model schooner's stand and set the Hamilton where it anchors the room without trying. Rowing at dawn has given my arms back their familiar ache, the honest fatigue that makes sleep what it should be. This morning I walked to the harbor rail and said out loud what I mean to keep so I can hear my own voice if memory turns thin. Choose posture over panic. Prefer paper to promises. Let silence do work argument cannot. Hold a keel under you. Steer small. Keep your wake narrow. None of those lines will make a greeting card. All of them kept my house standing. Back at the table, I opened the new ledger and wrote a single closing line on the first page. Dignity held. Assets guarded. Door ajar. I dated and signed it the way I signed the page that began this course 2 months ago. The ritual completed a circle I hadn't known how to draw when the first wave hit. Slack has already begun to lean toward flood. Out past the end of the pier, a faint current puts its hand on the boat and asks her to point where the day is going. I pocketed the index card with the triangle and the sentence about mercy, switched off the lamp, and let the harbor's patient light do the rest. The channel is narrow, yes, but it is navigable. I have a heading, a keel under me, and a wake I mean to keep small. In the quiet after the storm, what endures isn't victory. It's alignment. Truth settles the way a harbor finds slack tide. Not with noise, but with accuracy. Boundaries stop being walls and become care. Records turn from chores into anchors. Mercy learns to open a door without handing over the keys. We cannot bargain our way back to innocence, but we can choose posture over panic, paper over promises, and a wake so small it leaves room for repair. The work isn't glamorous. Renew the habits, keep the witnesses close, make every dollar agree with its place and time. Dignity, once guarded, grows quiet and strong. And when the current turns, steer small, hold a true line, and let conduct, not apology, prove the change. If this story resonated, tell us what moments stayed with you and why. Share your thoughts below and let others learn from your perspective. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next tale about resilience, boundaries, and second chances. We're grateful you're here. Stay with us for what comes next.